You're overreacting, Lynn. Your brother needs this house more than you ever will, my mother said, holding up the deed like it was some kind of trophy. Her tone was sharp, dismissive, the same voice she had used my entire life when my feelings were inconvenient. He has a wife and a baby coming. You're just alone. The words cut deeper than I expected. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room I'd spent my entire savings on. As the laughter and clinking glasses of the so-called housewarming party swirled around me, the life I had imagined in this house was dissolving before my eyes. My name is Linh Tran, and at 32 I thought I had finally built something of my own. After years of working 12-hour shifts as a nurse at City General, picking up every extra shift I could, I'd saved up $150,000, money I'd planned to use for my own future. But when my parents were about to lose their home, I stepped in. I couldn't let them be homeless. I used my savings to buy this house under one condition: it would be in my name, my investment, my security. A fair exchange, or so I thought. But fairness doesn't exist in my family. My younger brother Koa, the golden son, stood near the fireplace, his arm wrapped around his pregnant wife. His smirk was infuriatingly familiar, the same smug expression he'd worn every time my parents rescued him from one disaster after another. He was the kind of person who fell upwards, no matter how badly he screwed up. "We already filed the transfer," my stepfather added, his voice as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "The house belongs to Koa now. You should be happy for him. Family takes care of each other." Family. That word had been used to justify so much in my life: my missed opportunities, my sacrificed dreams, my silence in the face of their endless favoritism. My stomach twisted as I looked at the guests, aunts, uncles, distant cousins, all awkwardly pretending not to hear, not to notice how I was being erased from my own story. In the corner, my Aunt Thu, one of the only relatives who ever really saw me, shook her head. Her eyes held a quiet sadness, the kind that said she understood exactly what was happening but couldn't stop it. My best friend, Mai, who'd come to support me, stood near the window, her face tight with barely controlled anger. "This is wrong," I said, my voice trembling. "We had an agreement." My mother waved me off with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "You're a nurse. You'll save up again. Koa needs stability for his child. You don't need all this space." And just like that, all the years of being the dependable daughter, the one who gave up vacations, worked through holidays, took care of our parents when Koa was too busy, came crashing down. They had taken my money, my trust, and now my home. But they hadn't taken my voice. Not this time. Growing up, the lines were always clear. Koa was the baby, the boy, the prince. After my father passed away when I was 10, my mother remarried within a year. My stepfather treated me politely enough, but Koa was his pride and joy. While I worked after school shifts at a nail salon to save for college, Koa coasted through life. New motorbikes, study abroad programs he never finished, failed side businesses funded by my parents. Each time his latest venture collapsed, my parents swooped in to save him, even if it meant dipping into their retirement fund. When I got into nursing school, I didn't even ask for help. I knew better. I took out loans, worked nights, and survived on instant noodles while Koa backpacked across Europe with his friends. 6 months ago, when my mum called crying about the foreclosure notice, I felt that old pull, the need to fix everything. I had finally saved enough for my own place, but instead of buying my dream condo, I offered to help them buy this house. We'd all live together, I'd help with expenses, and in return, the house would be in my name. security for me, and a roof over their heads. It was a good plan, at least that's what I told myself. We toured homes together, and the moment I saw this house, I fell in love. A bright, open living room, a small garden in the back, it felt like the future I'd been working toward. I signed the purchase agreement. My name was on every piece of paperwork. "You saved this family," my mom had said, hugging me tightly the day we got the keys. "We'll make it work, I promise." I clung to that promise, ignoring the way she always called it Koa's house in front of relatives, ignoring the secret phone calls between her and my stepfather when they thought I wasn't listening. Even when Mai warned me, I brushed it off. "Get it all in writing," she'd begged over lunch one day. "You know how they are with Koa." "They would never steal from me," I said, and I believed it until today. The day before the housewarming, I spent my last few dollars on new curtains, soft towels, and a set of ceramic dishes I'd imagined using for future family dinners. Now, those dishes felt like props in someone else's life. Standing in that kitchen, watching Koa play the gracious host, my fingers curled into fists. Every shift I worked, every birthday I missed, every date I cancelled to cover an extra night at the hospital, all for this. They hadn't just stolen my savings, they'd stolen my future. As the party thinned out, leaving behind half-empty wine glasses and crumpled napkins, I sat at the kitchen island, staring at my phone, willing myself not to cry. Mai slid onto the stool beside me. "You need to call Tuan," she whispered, naming her older brother, a real estate attorney. "There's no way they could have done this legally, not without your signature." Just then, Koa walked by with his arm around Jessica, his wife. "We'll probably tear down the wall between the kitchen and the dining room," he told someone. "Really open up the space." I swallowed hard, bile rising in my throat. My kitchen, my house, my dream. I glanced at the stack of papers my parents had given me months ago, still sitting in the corner by the fridge. When no one was looking, I slipped the whole folder into my bag. "I need some air," I mumbled to Mai, stepping onto the back porch. In the quiet darkness, I pulled out the paperwork, my fingers trembling, the purchase agreement with my name, my signature, and then something new. A letter from their lawyer dated just 2 weeks earlier, warning them that transferring the deed without my written consent was illegal. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "Stop sulking. Come back inside and be happy for your brother." Something inside me, the quiet, obedient daughter, finally snapped. I opened a new message to Tuan. "Can you meet tomorrow? I need legal help. Urgent." His reply came seconds later. "Absolutely. Bring everything you have." When I walked back into the house, my mother and stepfather were whispering with Koa in the living room. Their heads turned in unison when I entered. "Finally done with your little tantrum?" my mother asked, her voice dripping with condescension. I smiled. "No, actually, I just wanted to thank you." "For what?" she asked warily. "For showing me exactly where I stand." They exchanged confused looks, clearly expecting tears, begging, or some pathetic plea for compromise. But I was done begging, done being the daughter who gave and gave while getting nothing in return. As I grabbed my purse, Koa smirked. "See? I told you she'd get over it." I paused at the door, turning back just once. "No, Koa, I won't get over it, but you'll wish I had." The next morning, I walked into Tuan's office, a folder full of documents in my hand and a lifetime of anger burning in my chest. I managed a small smile, and I could see the confusion flicker across their faces. They were expecting me to break down, to beg or cry, but those days were over. "Actually, I should thank you," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You've made everything so much clearer." My mother exchanged glances with my stepfather, both visibly uneasy with my composure. They didn't know that every ounce of hurt I used to carry had hardened into something far stronger, resolve. As I reached for my purse, I caught the sound of Koa's laugh. "See?" he said, leaning back on the sofa with all the confidence of someone who never faced a consequence in his life. "Told you she'd get over it." I paused at the door, turning back just once. "No, Koa, I won't get over it, but you'll wish I had." The next morning, I sat across from Tuan, Mai's brother, in his sunlit office. My fingers were curled tightly around my coffee cup, but my heart wasn't racing with fear anymore. It was focus. Tuan flipped through the stack of documents I'd brought, pausing occasionally to jot down notes. Finally, he leaned back, shaking his head with a grim smile. "They really messed up, Lynn," he said, holding up the lawyer's warning letter I'd found. "Not only is the transfer illegal, but it's outright fraudulent. You paid the down payment, your name is on the purchase documents, and there's clear written proof of the agreement. They can't just erase you like this." "But the title already lists Koa as the owner," I said, my throat tight. "That doesn't matter," Tuan assured me. "A fraudulent transfer can be undone, especially when it's this blatant. I'm also flagging this for criminal review. The DA's office would be very interested in a case like this." I inhaled sharply. "Criminal charges? I don't want to send my family to jail." Tuan's eyes softened, but his voice stayed firm. "Lynn, they stole $150,000 from you. That's grand theft. On top of that, there's evidence someone forged your signature on some of these filings. They're counting on you to be too loyal, too afraid of rocking the boat to fight back." He was right. For years, my silence had been my parents' greatest weapon, but this time, they'd made the mistake of giving me proof. As Tuan outlined our options, my phone vibrated constantly in my purse, messages from my mother alternating between guilt-laced pleas and furious demands to be reasonable. "What do you want to do?" Tuan asked gently. I took a deep breath, the weight of every betrayal settling into something solid inside me. "I want my house back, and I want them to understand they can't treat me like this ever again." Tuan nodded, his expression approving. "I'm filing an emergency injunction to freeze the property and prevent any renovations or sales. Then we'll move forward to void the transfer entirely." As I left his office, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The fear was gone. All that was left was purpose. That night, I worked a full shift at the hospital, barely checking my phone. When I did, the notifications were relentless, missed calls, frantic texts, and finally, the one that made me laugh out loud. "What the hell did you do?" From Koa. Let them sweat. Let them feel a fraction of what they'd put me through. Tomorrow, they'd realize that the quiet daughter they'd always dismissed had finally found her voice. The next morning, chaos arrived at my doorstep. I was halfway through my coffee when Mai called. "Your mom and Koa are outside your building," she said. "They're making a scene." Sure enough, when I peeked out the window, there they were. Koa pacing angrily, my mother banging on the front door like she could shatter it with sheer desperation. I took my time going down. Let them wait. "You have to stop this," my mother cried the moment I opened the door. "This will destroy our family." I folded my arms, calm washing over me. "Funny," I said. "You didn't seem too worried about destroying our family when you stole my savings." Koa stepped forward, face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous, Lynn. I have a baby on the way. What were you going to do with a house like that anyway? Live there alone with your plants?" I smiled, cold, not kind. "Actually," I said, holding up my phone, "I have the original agreement right here, and the letter from your lawyer warning you this was illegal. Or would you prefer we talk about the documents with my forged signature?" The color drained from my mother's face. She reached for my arm, her voice low and trembling. "Honey, we can fix this. We're family. There's no need to involve lawyers." I gently pulled my arm back. "We stopped being family the moment you decided my future didn't matter. The DA already has everything. If you want to fix this, call your lawyer and reverse the transfer. You'd send your own mother to jail? Her voice cracked, tears welling in her eyes, the same tears that had always softened me, worn down my defenses. But not this time. No, Mom, I said quietly. You sent yourself there. Koa opened his mouth to argue, but his phone rang. I could hear Jessica's frantic voice on the other end. There are police here. They're asking questions about the house. Koa's bravado melted into pure panic. They left in a hurry, my mother shooting me one last pleading look before following her golden son down the driveway. Mai, who'd parked across the street to keep an eye on things, walked up after they left. I've never seen you stand up to them like that, she said, pride clear in her voice. I exhaled slowly. I've never had proof before. It was always my word against theirs. Not anymore. Later that afternoon, Tuan called with an update. Koa and my parents had already contacted their lawyer, begging for a settlement. They were willing to reverse the transfer, pay my legal fees, and even offer damages. Anything to avoid criminal charges. Should we take the deal? Tuan asked. Yes, I said firmly. But I want one more thing. A written, signed statement admitting exactly what they did. No rewriting the story, no playing the victim. 2 weeks later, I sat in Tuan's office as my parents and Koa signed the settlement papers. The house was officially mine again. They paid my legal fees and an additional $50,000 in damages. And then came the final piece, the notarized statement admitting the fraud, the forged signatures, the theft. My mum's hand shook as she signed. George stared down at his lap. Koa's face was tight with anger, his shoulders hunched like a child caught cheating on a test. As the notary collected the last document, Koa muttered under his breath, "I hope you're happy." I met his gaze, unwavering. I am. For the first time in a long time. They filed out without another word, my mother pausing at the door to look back at me, one last plea for forgiveness in her eyes. I didn't flinch. That part of me was gone. Tuan slid the new deed across the desk with a smile. Congratulations, Lynn. The house is officially yours. But I had one more surprise. Actually, I said, pulling out another set of papers, I'm selling it. Tuan raised his eyebrows. You sure? Absolutely. My parents had made that house toxic. I didn't want their shadows lingering in my future. A developer had already made an offer, more than I ever expected. I was ready to start over somewhere new, somewhere that belonged only to me. As I walked out into the sunlight, I felt the weight of years lift off my shoulders. They'd expected me to be the quiet, obedient daughter forever. They never imagined I'd learn how to fight back. They know now. Eric opened his mouth to argue, but before a word could come out, his phone rang. His wife, Jessica's voice, spilled loudly from the speaker, her tone frantic. "The police are at our house. They're asking questions about the deed." His face drained of colour. Without another word, he grabbed his coat and bolted, my mother hurrying after him. They didn't even say goodbye. Rachel, who had been watching from her car to make sure I was okay, climbed out and wrapped me in a hug. I have never, in all the years I've known you, seen you stand up to them like that, she said, pride shining in her eyes. I exhaled slowly, the tension releasing from my shoulders for the first time in days. I've never had proof before, I said. It was always their word against mine, but not this time. That afternoon, Marcus called. His voice was calm but laced with quiet satisfaction. Their lawyer reached out. They're ready to negotiate. In the end, it didn't take long. The fear of criminal charges did what years of emotional manipulation couldn't. It made them take me seriously. They agreed to reverse the deed transfer, cover all my legal fees, and pay an additional $50,000 in damages. Should we accept the deal? Marcus asked. Yes, I said without hesitation, on one condition. I want them to sign a formal statement admitting exactly what they did. No excuses. No rewriting the story to make themselves the victims. 2 weeks later, I sat across from my mother, George, and Eric in Marcus's office. The room was silent except for the faint scratch of pen on paper as they each signed their names on the legal settlement and the notarized statement of wrongdoing. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a crumpled tissue while George sat hunched forward, avoiding my gaze entirely. Eric, once so smug, now looked 10 years older, his jaw tight with resentment. Jessica had left him after discovering that the house theft was only the beginning. Eric had been hiding mounting debts from her, taking out credit cards in her name and draining their joint savings. The house was supposed to be his new start, the one thing he could still control, not anymore. I need all parties to sign here, the notary said, handing me the final page. My hand was steady as I signed my name. I wasn't shaking anymore. I was reclaiming what was mine. Eric stood up first, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Hope you're happy, he muttered. You ruined everything. I stood too, lifting my bag over my shoulder. No, Eric. You ruined everything when you decided my life savings were yours to take. I'm just making things right. They filed out, my mother lingering in the doorway, waiting for me to meet her gaze. I didn't. The guilt trips, the pleading looks, they didn't work on me anymore. Marcus slid the freshly filed deed across his desk. Congratulations, Mia. The house is yours. But I had one more surprise. Actually, I said, pulling out another document, I'm selling it. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You sure? Absolutely. The house had been tainted by lies and betrayal. I wanted no part of it. What my family didn't know was that a developer had already offered me well over market value to convert the property into luxury townhomes. It was the perfect deal and the perfect way to leave the past behind. They'll lose their minds when they find out, Rachel said later, over coffee. They thought they could manipulate you into letting them live there forever. That's exactly why I'm selling it, I said with a smile. They need to understand that their control over me is gone. The next day I signed the sale documents. The developer was thrilled. My real estate agent was thrilled. And I felt lighter than I had in years. Between the sale profit and the settlement money, I could finally buy my dream home, the cottage I'd always wanted, and still have enough left for savings. As I drove away from the closing, my phone buzzed with a voicemail. It was my mom. Her voice was raw, pleading. Please, Mia, we just found out you sold the house. We need to talk. Please, honey, call me back. I deleted the message without listening to the rest. Some people might call that cruel. I call it boundaries. The weeks after the sale felt like stepping into a new life. I found a charming little cottage just outside the city with a wrap-around porch and a yard big enough for the garden I'd always dreamed of. Rachel helped me move in, and together we painted the walls in soft blues and greens, peaceful colours, the opposite of the dark, dramatic tones my mum had always insisted were elegant. My phone still lit up with messages from family. Some were furious, calling me selfish for abandoning my parents after all they'd done for me. Others tried guilt-tripping me with stories of how my mother cried herself to sleep. My Aunt Sarah, the only one who had ever stood by me, told them all to get over themselves. I saw your mum at the grocery store, Sarah told me one Sunday over brunch. She was going on and on about how ungrateful you are, but nobody's buying it anymore. That signed statement made the rounds. People know the truth. I smiled, sipping my coffee. I wasn't the difficult daughter anymore, the one who refused to help her family. Now, I was the daughter they had tried to rob, and everyone knew it. Eric and Jessica finalized their divorce. He moved back in with my parents, all of them crammed into a tiny rental they could barely afford. I heard through the grapevine that Eric had taken a job at an electronics store, his first real job in years. I didn't feel joy at their struggle, but I did feel a deep sense of justice. With my family's drama no longer draining me, I threw myself into my career. I applied for and got a promotion to charge nurse. I had better hours, a bigger paycheck, and for the first time, my work-life balance actually meant something. My co-workers noticed the change in me. I smiled more. I spoke up in meetings. And I no longer took the holiday shifts just because I didn't have a real family. One evening, as the sky turned pink and gold, I sat on my new porch, flipping through a seed catalogue. My mum's number flashed on my phone. I let it go to voicemail, then listened later. She wanted money for Eric's rent. I deleted it and turned back to my catalogue. My tomatoes were already sprouting, and my violets were blooming in neat rows. I had cleared the soil of weeds, just like I had cleared my life of toxic relationships. Rachel joked that I should write a book called How to Stop Being a Doormat in 3 Easy Steps. Maybe she was right. All it took was losing my life savings, standing up to my family, and finally choosing myself. 6 months after selling the house, my life was mine again. My garden flourished, my neighbours became friends, and I even joined a book club. I started dating again, something I'd put off for years because my family always needed me for something. The family drama never fully disappeared, but I learned to handle it differently. Whenever my mom reached out, I stuck to one phrase: I'm not in a position to help. No guilt, no explanations, just a firm, calm boundary. Eric's life spiraled further. Jessica discovered he'd taken out secret credit cards in her name, leaving her thousands in debt. When she asked for help, I connected her with Marcus. That at least felt good, helping someone who deserved it. One spring morning, while I was weeding my flower beds, a car pulled into my driveway, and my mum stepped out, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. "Your garden's beautiful," she said softly, standing just outside the fence. "Thanks," I replied, still working, "but you need to call before you show up." "I know, I miss you, and we're selling our place. We can't afford it anymore." I stood up and dusted off my hands. "I'm not giving you money, Mum. I wasn't asking for—" She stopped herself, then sighed. "Okay, maybe I was." "Family doesn't steal from family," I said gently. "You made your choices. Now you live with them." She left in tears. I felt nothing but peace. That night, Rachel, Aunt Sarah, and a few friends came over for wine and dinner on my porch. The fireflies flickered in the garden and laughter filled the air. "To boundaries," Rachel said, raising her glass. "To growth," I added, and with every flower I planted I knew I'd choose myself again and again, no regrets.